Today we are going to focus on a very fun technique that will give you partial die cutting. And I'm going to show you two ways to do the partial die cutting. The one on the left is done primarily with dies. There's not a lot of stamping involved. The actual partial die cutting is done with dies, meaning that the dies are actually the focal point and the design. And then the one on the right, yes, there are dies that were involved in cutting the shapes, but in this case, I started with a stamped image and did the partial die cutting. In this case, I really focused on the dies, the design that is shown on the top. But let me show you what partial die cutting really is all about. And I think this one is the easier one to show so that you can see. So on the back of the front of this card, you can see that only half of the die cut through the paper. And what that does is it gives you this really cool, just visual effect where you see that the image that was cut is mirrored because there's a die that is cut in the same shape that's put on the top. And then you have part of the background that is open, the back of the card, that you can decorate however you want to. But partial die cutting. So bear with me for just a minute, because this is, I think, the most important thing to get and to understand when we're talking about partial die cutting. So if I get my die cutting plates out and I start with the base, this happens to be one that's magnetic, it really doesn't matter, but I've got a base, then I've got the bottom plate, and then I've got the top plate. So normally when we put something in and we're die cutting, we're going to put a piece of paper. In this case, I'm just going to put my card base down. I'm going to grab a die. I'm not going to die cut because I'm going to show what we normally do, and then I'm going to do it differently. But normally we would put a die, and we've got our base, our plate, our paper, our die, and then we're going to stick another plate on the top, and we're going to run this through our die cutting machine. Well, not a mystery, but one of the reasons that that shape is going to cut out is because there's pressure on the top and there's pressure on the bottom. There are rollers that are in the die cutting machine, and they're going to put pressure on the bottom and on the top. So where I have the top plate and the bottom plate, that pressure is going to cut the image. So if I only want part of the image to be cut, then what I'm going to do is make sure that that sandwich, the top and the bottom plate, are only on part of the image. So if I were to do this, and don't look at the way I have this oriented, but if I were to put something like this together, where the top plate is only on part of that die, and I ran this through my die cutting machine, this is the side that would cut the shape. This is not going to cut. There's not going to be any pressure coming down from the top, so it's not going to cut. So let's look at how this was cut. And I've got my bottom plate, I've got the platform, I should call it, the platform, then the bottom plate. And then let's just look at this. So I used this die, which is from the Delicate Baubles Dies set. This is one that's in the current holiday catalog. And just kind of think about this for a second. So I put this on, and that means, well, that means that I need to make sure that when I put the paper through, that I put this plate, this top plate, on the right side, right? Because I'm going to put pressure on the top and on the bottom because I want to cut this side away. I don't want to cut into the card base on this side. Okay, well, let's do it. Let's not talk about it. Let's actually do it. I'm starting with a regular old A2 card base. This is just our standard. This is 8.5 by 5.5. So it's half a sheet of paper. And then I have scored it on the 8.5 side at 4.25. So it's just a regular old standard card base. What I want to do is I want to place my die on this card base. And I want to be able to position it so I can run this through my die cutting machine and cut this side off. All right, sounds easy, and it is, it truly is. But let's talk about a couple of things that I'm going to do to that piece of paper before I run it through my die cutting machine. I'm going to grab a T ruler. You do not need a T ruler. You can use an acrylic ruler. You can use a regular ruler that we had in grade school, the wooden one that has the metal blade kind of running through the side, whatever ruler you have. And don't get nutty about this, because in the end, it really won't matter that much. It's just kind of a visual guide. So I know that I want my image to be kind of hanging over to the right, because I'm going to put some more design to the left. And what I'm going to do is, just for me, I'm going to use my ruler, and I'm showing you how you can do this with a T ruler. And I'm going to line it up on the top. A T ruler is nice because it will give you a nice 90-degree angle. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of little tiny pencil marks. So that's about where I want it to kind of hang over the side. So I'm just going to put a little tick mark and a little tick mark. And all that's going to do is help me visualize where and how I want that plate to be. I kind of want to have that in the middle. And again, if it's not perfect, that's fine. Just it's a good place to start as you go. So now I'm going to get this ready to go through my die cutting machine. And what I need to do for that is just get, again, the regular old base, the first plate on the bottom. I'm going to put my piece a little over to the left. And the reason is I'm going to need to put the other plate kind of like this, and then put it into my machine. So I need to have a little bit of a sort of a runway to get this the way I want it to. I'm also going to just try and hold the sides of the top and the bottom just so everything's kind of straight. And then I'm going to put my die in here. And I'm going to grab my top plate. And what's really nice is if I can line up my plate with that tick mark on the top and the tick mark on the bottom. And I'm kind of overlapping my fingers on the edge on the top and the bottom, then I know that my paper is pretty straight. Okay, so that's where I'm going to end up die cutting that die. And what I want to do is I just want to hold it down. So I've got this Post-it note stuff. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of post that down. So that die is going to stay where I want it to be. Then I'm going to hold that down. And I'm going to grab another piece of Post-it note. And you can use washi tape. You can use whatever you want. And now that's kind of where I want it to be. All right. And I'm actually going to just run this through. And I'm going to, when I run it through, I'm just going to make sure, and again, you can see that tick mark on the top, the tick mark on the bottom, and I'm going to hold that as I run it through my die cutting machine. So I'm going to bring in my die cutting machine, and I'm just going to show you how I'm going to do that. And I know this is not the most exciting thing to watch, and I'm going to try and get this on camera. So I'm putting this in, and it feels a little awkward because normally we're going to line everything up. But I want to show you that as I'm putting this all in, I'm just making sure that that plate, again, is tick mark, and I'm going to have to bring this off camera just a little bit, and I'm going to run it through. So I'm just going to run that right through. I'm not going to run it backwards because I don't want to risk that that might have moved. So I'm just going to run it one way, and then I'm going to take my plate out, and let's look at the result. So again, what should have happened, and you'll see that it did, is since we had the plate on the bottom and on the top, on that right-hand side, that's where the cut went. And I'm just going to take all of this off. I can reuse that Post-it note on the next one that I do. And if I just lift this up, you can see that that just cut on the right. So that's kind of cool. And it did what I wanted it to. It pretty much lined up top to bottom. Okay, so that's step one of the partial die cut. And the most important thing to remember is where to put the top plate, because that's where you want the pressure to go. Well, let's look at our finished card one more time and think about where we are and where we need to go. Because we've done step one of the partial die cutting, but what we haven't done is we haven't cut out the side completely. We need to cut that completely off, that section completely off the card, which means we need to cut from the top of the die cut to the top of the card, and from the bottom of the die cut to the bottom of the card. And there are a couple of ways you can do this. This is the way that I like to do it, and I find that it is the easiest. It is the least frustrating for me. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my ruler back in, and I can see where that cut has stopped on the top. And if I just take a pencil and I just do a line, and I can see the bottom, and I'm just going to do a line down at the bottom, I know where I need to cut. There are three ways you can do this. One is you can grab your paper trimmer. You can put this piece into your paper trimmer, and you can line up where that top and bottom places are. You can put this in. You can use your trimmer. Just be very, very aware that if you do that, and I'm not going to do this, I would push the blade up, and when I get really close to where that line is or where that cut is, I'm going to slow way down, and I would just inch it up really, really, really slowly, and you're going to kind of feel it give, because it's going to be getting into almost an area with just air, and then you know that you've reached that edge. And then you would come in from the other end and you would do the same thing. Or, so that's option one. Option two, and I'm not going to do this either, is you can get your ruler out, get out an X-Acto knife, and cut and cut. And you might want to use a self-healing mat if you do that. Or what I like to do is probably the easiest, in my opinion, and that's to just get out a pair of scissors. And I am literally going to cut up the line that I drew. And for me, this gives me the most control, because I can get right to where that cut starts. And I can just very, very easily cut into where my die, that partial die, is going to be. And I can just take that right off, and I know that I'm right at the corner. So I'm not worried about using an X-Acto knife. I'm not worried about using my paper trimmer or anything else like that. And I'm just going to go right straight up and get rid of that edge and go right to where that die cut was. And sometimes you do have to give it just one more little bit of cut, and then you can pull it right off. Now, if you do have pencil marks, and you may, no biggie, just take your eraser. You're going to be able to get those marks off without a problem. And there you have your partial die cut. So on this card, what I did when I was figuring out how I wanted to put it all together, I have to confess that I used a retired stamp set. I do apologize, but I really thought it would be a lot of fun. And I used a couple of stamps that put in an evergreen bow. And it was a two-step stamping design. Then I used one of the stamps from the new For Unto Us stamp set. This is the Merry Christmas. And you'll see that I put that in the bottom left. And then on the inside of the card, I used yet another stamp set. This is Poinsettia Petals. This is in the annual catalog. And I like the warm wishes from our home to yours. Now, I did the stamping after I did the die cutting. And what that ends up looking like is once the die cutting is done, and then the stamping is done, this is kind of where I ended up. And I went ahead and I put all the stamping that I needed on this card. But let's talk more about the partial die cutting and some fun little tricks and tips in terms of maybe how to finish this card to get it to look like this card. So again, the die that I used when I did the partial die cutting on here is one of the bauble dies. And what I decided to do, because I really want this inside to look like this, I think it's a really cool effect. I think when people see it, they think, oh my goodness, how in the world did she do that? And if you keep that background very simple, you can bling up the front. And when you bling up the front, one of the things you can do is use the same die. And I cut out a bauble that is in a metallic gold. And since it's the exact same die, it's going to fit right into where that partial die cut is. It's just like a little puzzle piece. And then for this particular card, I wanted to feature more of the dies that are in the Delicate Baubles Dies set. I really wanted to dress the ornament up with more of the dies. So what I did, these are the dies that come with the set. And this die that I used to cut out that partial piece coordinates with a couple of other dies. There's one that says Merry and Bright, and that's one of them. And then the one that I chose is this die that is all about trees and sparkle. So what I did is, as you can see, I cut out a different color, a darker blue, and I used this particular die to get those pieces. And I decided that, as you can see on the final card, I wanted a little bit of a contrast. And what's really neat about dies like this, the ones that have the design on the outside and then also the cutouts, almost like a stained glass, I guess, if you want to think about that. You can mix and match colors. So if you think about when I did this die cut, I die cut the outside in a light blue. Over here, I die cut the outside in a dark blue. And now I can flip those colors to put the pieces of the tree on the inside. And these are some of the pieces that come out of that die that will end up going into this particular piece. And they fit in like a puzzle. A tip that I can give you is if you use a die like this and your intention is to use different colors and kind of fill in the spaces, be purposeful when you punch out the shapes. So the parts of the tree, you can see there are 3 pieces here on the first tier, 4 pieces here on the second, and then 5 on the third. I was really careful when I punched those out and I put them on a scrap piece of paper. So now if I wanted to put everything together, I know the order that these all go in. I know exactly how to fit them all together. So just be mindful when you're doing that so you don't feel like you're doing a jigsaw puzzle. And then you can take a little scrap of paper, and in this case, you can die cut a star. And obviously, since you use the same die, you can put a little bit of glue, and that will fit really well right into the top of that particular outline. And then what I wanted to do, there's another really, really fun die that comes in this set, and it's a hanger. It looks like a little bow, and it is one that you can do a lot of different things with. So I ended up cutting one of them out using early espresso and cut it down to the size that I wanted. I am not going to bore you to tears watching me put a die cut piece together. You know how to do that. So before we got on Zoom, I actually took a couple minutes and I put another one of my die pieces together. And I ended up actually doing the same colors that I had done on this one. And what I'm going to do is very quickly adhere this piece to the front, because the next part I want to show you is how to do the inside. There's a little trick that I think you will find very helpful if we just look at that very quickly. So the message on this particular card and this technique using partial die cutting is when you think about what image you want to use to do your partial die cut, you don't have to stamp. You can start with a die shape and you can come back with the same die shape on the top. You know, use a coordinating die just like I did on this one. And I'm going to make sure that when I flip this over, that I can't really see the opposite side of what I have on the front. I'm really trying to line things up as well as I can. So that is going to be the front of my card. And I'll show you how I finished it off in just a minute. But I really wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about how to do the front. You know, if you look at the finished card and then you look at this card, obvious difference. And this one looks a lot more complete. There's a nice color that goes with one of the colors that I used in the front. It has texture on it. And then when I open it up, there's a really fun little surprise that you can see on the middle. And what I also wanted to make sure is that when you flip it over, that inside piece, that blue textured piece, fitted really well against the corners. And that's the trick that I want to show you. So I'm going to grab a piece, and this is the same blue that I used on the front. You can see it's the same color. And in the instructions that I gave you, I said to purposely cut that piece a little bit longer. So you can see that it's a little bit longer than what I need. And if I slide this in, it's going to be much, much wider than what I need. So let's kind of think about how we can get from here to where we want to go. And the trick that I have for you is pretty basic. And that is if you put your finger and thumb on the top and the bottom of the card and it right by where you cut off the excess to get your partial die, you're going to create kind of a bumper. And then if I slide this piece that I have and I literally push it over, I cannot go beyond that piece of cardstock. It's like a barrier. I've created a barrier. So I'm going to be able to line that piece up really, really well. I don't care if it's hanging off the top and the bottom. That's really not what I care about right now. And what I did with this particular piece of cardstock is I put it through one of my absolutely favorite embossing folders. This is Tasteful Textile 3D embossing folder. I like this because it is not a straight vertical horizontal pattern. Having something that is a little random when you're putting it on the side like this will help, because you don't want to have something straight in case you're not putting it in straight and in case you don't cut it straight. And you'll see on the other card that I did, I used another pattern that has no lines. It's very abstract. So I just recommend that you do that. I'm going to flip this over. I can decide what side I want, honestly, too. Yeah, I'll put the other side on. So I'm just going to grab some of my Tombow and I am going to put some glue on here. And honestly, I'm not really going to care exactly if I'm getting all the way over to the edge or not, because I know I'm going to be trimming this. So I just want to get some glue on here. And what you're going to find is on some of the paper, when you've put it into an embossing folder, it's a little harder to glue because you've got ridges that you're dealing with. I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to lift the side up because I've got to be able to get that piece of cardstock in. But now I've got my finger and my thumb and I'm pushing with my right hand, I'm pushing the blue piece of paper up against where I cut. So it's like a barrier. It's like a doorstop. And I'm just gonna take that off. Obviously I glued over the edge. I don't care. I really don't. Because what I'm gonna end up doing here is I've now turned my card over. I'm going to grab a pair of scissors and I'm just gonna cut off the excess. And when I do that, I'm just going to try and get as straight as I can and go in and just cut that right off. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a really nice edge. And that piece of paper is going to look like it was purposely put right on the edge. I'll probably have to clean these scissors because they're going to get glue on them. But if that's the worst thing that happens today, I'm perfectly fine. So I'm just cutting this right off. And I'm going to stick it down to that piece of paper. And I've got one more edge that I'm going to cut off. All right. So now here's where we are. We've got a really nicely edged piece. And what's also nice is that edge stops right at the point where I did my cutting. And I don't need to be precise in terms of going in and out. I don't need to get that at the exact same place and cut the paper to the perfect width and height. It won't work. So each one of these is going to be a little different. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to change this up just a tad, maybe. I'm going to come in and I'm going to put a little bit of bling on the side, and I'm good with mixed metals. I used to like wearing silver and gold jewelry when it had, you know, silver and gold. I remember a watch that I really, really liked. It was silver and gold, and the band was silver and gold, and I thought it was really pretty. So I'm not really concerned that on that first card, I did gold, and on this one, I'm going to do silver. And what I'm going to do on here is I'm just going to butt that little strip right up against the piece that I just put on. And again, I'm just going to turn that over and cut off the end and cut off the end. And then I've got a really nice top and bottom finish. And it's a fun surprise. When you open the card, you have a cool edge. And then you've got another piece that just shows it off really well. To finish this card, what I did is I cut one of those, what are we going to call it? I guess a hanger. And let me bring back the original. I trimmed off the top because the hanger is actually very long, which is kind of neat, because if you have a card where you want to have the image or the ornament way down at the bottom, you have a really long hanger, but I put it on the top and just cut it to the length that I wanted. And then I decided I wanted to have some kind of gold and blue on top of the bauble. And I used the blue adhesive back gems to do that. These are gorgeous. Some of them have a gold tint to them, which is why I use these. They also have 2 different sizes. And then the other ones are really just blue. And I'm not going to bore you to tears watching me do that. So that's this card. Now I'm going to do the other card, and I'm going to bring that one back in. I want to bring another piece of cardstock to just put on top of this, since I have glue all over that green one. And I want to talk about the difference between these two, and then I'm going to do the partial die cutting on the one on the right. So basically, they're the same thing, meaning the same technique is used to cut the partial die cut. Exactly the same. The partial die cut is a very large poinsettia die. The exact same technique was used to put this piece of green in, exactly the way I did the blue. The difference is what I die cut. And what I mean by that is when I did this die cut, I just took the die, put it on a card base, and I cut the image. Well, there's one more step to this one. So let's kind of talk about that. And we will do this partial die cutting. Again, this is where I just want to go through the technique with you again to make sure that it makes sense. So on this die, or on this card, I used the beautiful, beautiful Poinsettia Petals dice stamp set. This is in the annual catalog. And there are amazing dies that go along with this. And I have put them into a different case because it's just easier for me to get to them. But this is the die that is the culprit for the partial die cutting on this one. And let's just kind of talk through that. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start with a stamped image. And I did. I'm doing this on white paper versus the very vanilla that I did the example card on. And what I did is I'm starting with a stamped image this time, not just a blank piece of cardstock. And it's kind of hard to see because I've got a lot of layers on here, but that bottom layer, this right here, is where I started. It looked like this when I started. And when I did that, I intentionally took 2 seconds to orient the shape and the orientation of that stamp to make sure that when I cut, especially when I cut up from the top and the bottom, that I didn't have an awful lot of things to worry about going around. And this will make sense in just a second. So this stamp is nice and large. It's gorgeous. It can be oriented in any direction. But I got my little ruler out, and imagine that this is the stamp, not the stamped image. It's easier to see if it's stamped. And I kind of put my ruler down and I thought, if I orient that image kind of like that, oh, that would be great, because I only need to cut that petal and down and that petal and up to get it free. If I went over here and I did that die cutting, then I'm going to have this funky little piece that's going to die cut in. I'm going to have a little kind of half circle and another half circle. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to look like it was a completely straight line with full petals hanging off. And it's totally up to you. But when you're figuring out if you have an image like this and you're stamping it, and then you want to do your partial die cutting, and then you have to figure out which way this goes, which always takes a second. Aha, that's how it goes. Figure out where you want to make that line, and especially where you want to make the cuts. Okay, so I'm going to first draw those little pencil lines. Now I'm getting into making that partial die cut, and I'm going to do that. And obviously I have stamped my image, and I am going to make sure, for me, this is just for me, it's maybe not what you want to do, and it's totally up to you, however you want to do this. I can see that I'm just going to need to make one cut to get it lined up, and one cut on the bottom and on the top. So I'm just going to do that little dinky pencil mark again. I'm going to have a much larger area to cut on this card versus the other card. So I'm just going to put those little pencil marks in. And now when I put this piece into the die cutting machine, it's the exact same process that we did on the other card. So let's do this one together as well. Let me grab the plates. So I am going to start with putting my pieces together. And just like I did before, I am going to pull my card a little bit over to the left, because remember, when you put that top plate on, you want a little bit of runway to get this side into your die cutting machine. So I'm just going to pull that over to the right, and then I'm going to go ahead and get this oriented how I want it to be. I am using my hands to make sure that the plate is lined up with the base. And then I'm going to bring in my other plate, and I'm just going to do a kind of a visual that I can see the top tick mark and the bottom tick mark. And when I hold my hand and I have everything straight, that it's kind of all lining up. And then I will hold that down. Just going to get my Post-it note here and kind of Post-it some stuff together to try to keep it from moving from where I have it aligned as I go through my die cutting machine. I'm going to bring that die cutting machine back in, and we're going to die cut this partial piece. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to put this to the left. And then again, when I get everything together, and it's kind of hard to see because it's off to the side right now, but I'm just making sure that everything is lined up. And I'm going to go ahead and run that through. And it's kind of interesting because as you're running it through, there's really nothing that feels like it's going through for a little while. And then you're just going to feel a little bit of pressure because I'm not going to make the entire die go all the way through. And just like I did on that first one, I'm not going to go backwards. I'm just putting it through one time. And let me take this off and we'll take a look at what we have here. So we'll take off the Post-it note. And again, I'll be able to use that if I want. And we can see that the die cut is only on part. So it's on the top of the petal here and around the bottom of this petal, but all of this is still uncut. And just like we did before, there are options because we want to cut the top and the bottom. We want to get this cut out and we want to get this cut out. And my preference, you do what makes you comfortable and what you find easy, is to use a ruler and to just, again, look at where my pencil marks were and find where that die cut ends. And it may not be where that pencil mark was. It's really going to be where the pressure came to. So I'm just going to bring my ruler over to that point, and I'm going to go from where that die cut ended and draw a line, and then where the die cut ended on the bottom and draw a line. And I can see that when I actually cut, and this is okay, I didn't get my plate all the way over, or my plate didn't cut all the way over. It went a little bit to the right, but I can see where that die cut ended. So we are good. I'm going to get my scissors and I'm just going to cut. I'm just going to follow that line that I just drew and go right up. And I'm going to slow down when I get to where that cut is. And if I need to give it a little bit more of a nudge, then I can do that. And that's going to come free. And then I'm going to come up into the other. And I'm going to cut that off as well. So I'll get the top and the bottom. And this one gave me a little bit of a problem, but that's all right. So now I've got the top and the bottom freed, and I have my partial die cut. So everything else on this card is exactly what we did on the first card in terms of using paper. The differences are I used designer series paper on the card on the right. I used cardstock and an embossing folder on the card on the left. I did the exact same thing in terms of cutting the designer series paper a little bit higher and a little bit wider than what I needed. And I held the top and the bottom and pushed it into the edge, pushed the designer series paper into the edge until it just wouldn't go any further. And that's how I made sure that that was positioned where it needed to be. I put a little bit of additional bling. I put one piece on the left and one piece in the middle, and they were taller than they needed to be. And I just turned everything over and cut it on the back. The other difference, which is very clear, is that the focal point on the left is all about dies. It's a die, and it's a die on the top. And there are, the die that's used as the hanger. So there's not an awful lot of stamping other than the sentiment on the outside and the greeting on the inside. Whereas on this card, this is all about stamping. And the stamp set that is the Poinsettia Petals stamp set has an awful lot of different poinsettias. And then the dies that come along with this are multiple sizes and also leaves. So what I did is I went through and stamped a lot of different sizes of the Poinsettia petals. And then I went back and I die cut them with the different dies, these two, and I just layered. I did the same thing by stamping and then die cutting some of the leaves, and I layered those. So you can see it has an awful lot of layering, but it still has that one piece that is the partial die cut on the front. I really hope that you give this a try. And I really think that once you do the partial die cutting and then look at some of the dies and stamps that you have in your stash, you're going to look at them differently. And let's be honest, let's think about one thing. Let's think about this for a second. Do I really need a die to do a partial die cutting on this card? No. I don't. An image like this, you don't need a die. All you need is a ruler. All you need is the ability to cut. If I put pencil lines top and bottom, if I cut that line and I cut that line with a pair of scissors, and then I fussy cut around these petals, how different is that than doing a partial die cut? You're going to end up with the same thing. So don't even limit yourself to whether you have a die that goes along with an image. Think about what it would look like if you were able to create the illusion of having a die cut by doing fussy cutting, because you can get to the same place. You also don't need to layer. You could use this as a mask. You could put a mask together and you could put some leaves behind and it would look like 3 layers. You don't even need to have a design. You could take a square, a circle, a rectangle, a diamond, it doesn't matter. And you could do, in this case, use a die, so a square die, circle die, do a partial die cut, and then do whatever you want. It doesn't need to be the same shape. So there are so many options for this kind of card. And I really think it just opens up the possibilities and the way that you look at your card making. What you will find, and what I did find, is on the card on the right, I'm mass producing these. So these are all the card bases that I've put together. I've got my Stamparatus set up. I know exactly where I need to put all these lovely little stamps to get this done. I have my happy little dies, and I've cut out a bunch of these, and I'm going to put them all together. And then all I need to do is do my partial die cut, get some paper, and once you get these set up, you can mass produce pretty quickly. So it's actually pretty easy and quick card to do. Well, I'm excited to see what you create, and I hope you have enjoyed learning about partial die cutting. So until next time, happy stamping.